Welcome to this episode of Moments in Leadership. Before we get started, I want to let you know that if you or anyone you know of is affiliated with a company that caters to the military or the veterans community, I'd really like to get this project underwritten by a company or two versus doing all these commercials that just get inserted in the middle of the podcast. I just don't like that. I'm not only thinking of large companies, but also I'm thinking of like gear companies, defense contractors, clothing companies, ammo companies, anything like that. Basically, any company that is at Modern Day Marine right now, or that would have a booth at the SHOT Show or something like that. It would just be a great way to highlight a company's name to listeners. My audience is an inch wide and a mile deep. So if you want to talk to veterans or anyone affiliated with the military, this is a great platform to do it. My intent is to help me get my costs covered and to keep this free for all the emerging leaders who are learning so much from all these great guests that I'm having on. So if you have any ideas or thoughts on that, please reach out to me on either Instagram, or you can find me or Moments in Leadership on LinkedIn, or you can just email me at themilloffice@gmail.com. So that's themilloffice@gmail.com. This episode is with Sergeant Major of the Army, David Weimer. But before we get going, I need to give a quick personal thank you to some Supercast supporters. I have retired Admiral James McNeil, who is a current ethics professor at the U.S. Naval Academy and an upcoming fall guest here on the pod. So thank you very much for joining in with the support. And thank you to everyone listening to this Supercast episode. Your contributions really help the project, as you know. Just a big thanks out to all of you who have stuck with it and keep continuing to support this effort. So, like I said, this episode is with Sergeant Major of the Army, Michael R. Weimer. Sergeant Major Weimer was sworn in as the 17th Sergeant Major of the Army on August 4th of 2023, and his most recent assignment was serving as the Command Sergeant Major for U.S. Army Special Operations Command at the now Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Throughout his career, he has served in a variety of positions from team member to Command Sergeant Major of Special Operations Joint Task Force Afghanistan to Command Senior Enlisted Leader at U.S. Special Operations Command Central. And as the Sergeant Major of the Army, Sergeant Major Weimer is the Army Chief of Staff's personal advisor on matters affecting the enlisted force. And he devotes the majority of his time traveling throughout the Army to observe training and interact with soldiers and their families. And he sits on a variety of different councils and boards that make decisions affecting enlisted soldiers and their families. And he's routinely invited to testify before Congress. Sergeant Major Weimer is the public face of the U.S. Army's Non-Commissioned Officer Corps, representing the NCO Corps to the American people in the media and through business and community engagement. He's also a military child, calling multiple locations home throughout his youth, after which he enlisted in the Army in 1993. He successfully completed Special Forces Assessment and Selection in 1994, then went on to become a graduate of the Special Forces Weapons Sergeant course and earned his Green Beret in 1996. His previous assignments include tours with the 7th Special Forces Group and nearly 20 years in Special Mission Units. Sergeant Major Weimer's military education includes all levels of non-commissioned officer education system, the Sergeant Major's course, Executive Leader course, Summit course, Military Freefall Jump Master course, Static Line Jump Master course, Equal Opportunity Leaders course, High Risk Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape, or SEER, and finally Air Assault School. Sergeant Major Weimer is a graduate of Norwich University, having received his Bachelor of Science degree in Strategic Studies and Defense Analysis. Okay, now get ready to copy. Here are his awards and decorations. They include the Defense Superior Service Medal, 2nd Award with a Combat Device, 1st Award, the Legion of Merit, Bronze Star Medal with Valor, 2nd Award, Bronze Star Medal, 5th Award, which means when you look at his command photo, he actually wears 2 Bronze Star Medal ribbons per the Army regulations. He has a Purple Heart, Defense Meritorious Service Medal, 1st Award. It's a Meritorious Service Medal. It's a Joint Service Commendation Medal with a Valor Device. He has a Joint Service Commendation Medal with a Combat C device and a Joint Service Commendation Medal. An Army Commendation Medal, an Army Achievement Medal, an Army Good Conduct Medal, 8th Award, National Defense Service Medal with 2nd Award, Armed Forces Expeditionary Medal, Afghanistan Campaign Medal, 3rd Award, Iraq Campaign Medal, 3rd Award, Global War on Terrorism Expeditionary Medal, Global War on Terrorism Service Medal, Non-Commissioned Officer Professional Development Ribbon, 5th Award, NATO Medal, Army Service Ribbon, Special Forces Tab, combat infantry badge, military freefall jumpmaster badge, and the air assault badge. Weimer is married and has 2 children. And with that, welcome Sergeant Major of the Army, Michael Weimer. He is the 17th Sergeant Major of the United States Army. And just as a little bit of commonality here, I noticed from your official photograph that you are also a gold winger. So you must have jumped with the Marines at some point to get that. And I'm a fellow gold winger as well.
Well, actually, if you're referencing the one on my right side of my uniform, that's actually Chilean.
Oh, it is.
I
Okay.
think it's either Chilean or Colombian wings, because I think I have both. So I don't remember what picture you're looking at.
They changed the Navy Marine Corps parachute insignia maybe 10 years ago, and it looks so much more like a foreign.
They're very similar looking.
Yeah. So my mistake. But anyway, regardless, welcome to Moments in Leadership. Really appreciate you coming on the podcast today. I'm excited to talk to you about all of your experience. I love starting the podcast off by just asking a very simple question. What was PFC Weimer like?
Holy moly.
The people want to know.
I'm sorry. I probably shouldn't have laughed that hard. Wow. PFC Weimer was pretty well. I mean, I was fit. I was very serious about joining the Army. If my mother was here, she would tell you she knew I wanted to be a Green Beret since I was probably in about 7th or 8th grade. So, I mean, I was fully committed, right? So there wasn't a compliance issue at that point in time. I just come out of college, just watched Mogadishu happen on TV, and my intrinsic motivation kind of turned into a wildfire. Like, hey, I got to get in. I got to get to work. But I was cocky and I was overconfident / arrogant, probably being kind to myself right now. And I had a lot to learn. So that's kind of how I started my journey off as a PFC when I came in.
You assessed right away into training for Special Forces, if I read your biography correctly. So you didn't really go to a traditional unit or anything, correct?
No. I started off in on a reserve contract. Actually, we used to have 2 reserve Special Forces units in the 80s and 90s, 11th and 12th. And the fastest way for me to get in the service was to take an 11th Special Forces reserve contract.
So what were some of those aha moments that you had from, let's just say, your first 5 years in the Army? What were some of the things from a leadership perspective that you observed? Were there moments where you said to yourself, I want to be exactly like this person, or I'm going to do everything I can in my ability to not be anything like this person?
Yeah, I got to be careful with those type of questions.
Oh yeah, no names, unless they're complimentary. And I know your community is kind of quiet anyway. But
well, and it's super small. Like, and it gets, the more we talk about the mid grade of my career, it gets even smaller. So it doesn't take too much to do a little intel work to find out who I'm talking about. But yes. And it's actually something I talk about quite a bit is, the journey that is leadership, right? And I truly do believe it ends when you end up in the ground or in an urn. You don't ever get there. You're gonna see plenty of people that, boy, I'm never doing it that way. And then you're gonna see, hopefully, just as many where you're like, man, that's a leader like I want to be like. And I saw quite a few of those during my young enlisted and young NCO days in 7th Special Forces Group in the 90s. I really did. And they're probably extremes on both ends, just to be extra candid with you without saying names. I saw some people that were like, I don't even know how you got here. And then I saw some people that were like, holy cow, this person is amazing.
What were the things that stuck out to you about the people who were amazing?
They were really good at their jobs and they took care of their people.
Yeah, that is a common thread across all of my guests. I know we talk about as leaders all the time, taking care of your people, but it's a lot more than just something that you say as a leader. It's really something that you have to do. Were there moments in the early part of your career where someone of authority, let's just say a senior NCO, really came down and took care of you on an issue? Was there something that resonated with you or that you specifically remember as an example?
Yeah, there's a couple, but I'll pick one out, probably one that's popular for people to share. But I needed a little tuning up, as we used to say when I was younger. Some of the tough love stuff is the stuff that's most impactful, right? And you go back to E5, E6, Mike Weimer, and I was pretty cocky and confident, and I had a lot to learn. And, I failed a pre-scuba course. I went through a pre-scuba course. It's the first thing I'd ever failed in my life, to be honest with you. And I had a senior non-commissioned officer come alongside me and turn that into an actual learning event, because that was hard. I didn't know exactly what to do with that kind of failure at that time, and he helped me turn that around. And I still reflect back on what I learned from that experience.
So, how did that early moment shape some of the tough or important decisions, in your years as a senior leader now, or even a sergeant major of the Army?
Well, because of that lack of humility, or complete hubris, I didn't prepare. I was overconfident, and it cost me. One, I've never forgotten that. So I prepare for everything. I prepared for even sitting here with you. Some would say, "Why did you prepare?" I mean, you're just going to sit down and talk about your experiences and your answer leadership questions. Yeah, I just don't roll that way. I go through at least some type of mental preparedness, preparation, if you will, before I do everything. Because frankly, I just don't want to half step. I like to give my best in everything. It's my reputation. It's my wife's reputation, my kids' reputation. It's the Army's reputation. So that goes all the way back to that first real professional failure, if you will. And then I tell you, the empathy and the coaching and the mentoring that he demonstrated when he kind of sorted me out, if you will. I'm like, "Hey, pick yourself up, get your head up, quit moping around. This isn't the end of the world." And he kind of talked me through that. I've never forgotten that. And that's one of those things that, I've tried to give back every chance I can when I've had one of my teammates that struggled like that.
I'm curious. You've been through so many different selection and evaluation courses.
Yes. Yes, I have.
So I'm not going to let you give me the stock answer here. I'm going to push a little bit on this one, but I know that senior leaders are generally pretty humble about themselves, and I get that. But do you remember a very specific time where you were really, really proud of yourself as a leader? And so what I mean by all the assessments, everything, like, you can't say I was really proud of myself when I got my Green Beret, because I think that's just kind of everybody knows that. Tell us something that we don't know.
Yeah, you're right. It's not something I like to talk about. Probably the first time I was truly in charge, like probably my first year as an assault team leader, where I, took my people to combat. That's probably one of those times where, and I was fortunate enough to be able to do that for 3 years straight. But that first one is probably the one that was the most impactful. One, you feel the weight of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's one thing to do it in garrison, but then it's a whole nother to take them into that crucible where you feel, responsible and obligated to bring your people home. Yeah, that was way more impactful than the day I won my Green Beret or earned my Green Beret.
Yeah, I can imagine. One of the things that I talk to young leaders about is, this is my philosophy. If you can imagine something happening before it happens, and you can think through how you're going to react on the spot. I'm just going to make an example. Wounded fellow soldier with you.
Yep.
If you can visualize something like that, when you're in the moment, I think you have a little bit more clarity when you think through something like that. Was there anything that, from your experience, you're like, if I had imagined that happening, I would have had an easier time dealing with it? Because I do think that's one of the biggest struggles that people have with the fear of the unknown, is just not really knowing. And when they hear stories or examples about when people did experience something, it helps them imagine how to get through something like that.
I mean, there's some things you can do through, meditation, mindfulness training, if you will. I mean, those are valuable tools. But I have to say, what probably helped me the most in those type of scenarios, like, how do you prepare yourself for what I talked about in an article I read or wrote here recently, the regret you don't want as a leader, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you feel, I failed, we didn't train hard enough, we weren't prepared. You don't want that rock in your rucksack, because you'll have it for the rest of your life. So I am very draconian and ruthless when it comes to realistic training. I come from a couple organizations that will assume some pretty significant risk in realistic training. And I think that's one of those things, to your point, about how did I mentally prepare and then rehearse, because you never outgrow rehearsals, for, when one of your teammates is bleeding out, or two or three of them are, because that's not the time you want to have to think about that, or the first time you've actually rehearsed it. And so I always go back to training. That it is foundational for us.
I'd like to stay on that topic. And for listeners that haven't read it, Sergeant Major's written a fantastic article called Combat Doesn't Care. And if that's the article you were just referring to, it's fantastic. If there's a new one, I haven't read it yet. But there's a quote in that article that I want to read just so listeners have some context. You'll recognize it, obviously. The consequences of artificial readiness are the difference between life and death, success and failure, and winning or losing. Are you ready, or did you need a warm-up target? The enemy doesn't plan on giving you one. What sort of advice do you have for an emerging leader who thinks that they are seeing that the artificial readiness in their command? And how should they address that with leadership? Because it's a fine line when it's someone of a higher rank artificially preparing a unit. And so it's really hard for, I'm just going to say like E5, E6, O2, O3, maybe even O4 level. Yeah. Gosh, it's really hard to look at Sergeant Major Weimer and say like, hey, Sergeant Major, I think this is like, I think we're creating a self-licking ice cream cone here with this training. What are we doing? What's some advice you have there for bringing that to people's attention?
Yeah. So the journey of leadership, right? When you're an E5 or an E6, or be honest with you, even as a Sergeant Major in the Army, the first and foremost thing is you can only control yourself. So we have responsibilities as individual, war fighters, right? In this profession. Am I fit? Am I really good at my own job? Do I take it seriously? Am I continually training? Am I really serious about it? Right. If I'm not doing that, then I would always encourage everybody, don't be blaming higher for not allowing you to train, right? Because that's why fitness is so easy. It's like, are you fit? Well, I'm kind of fit. Okay, well, whose fault is that? Don't blame battalion, brigade, division. It's your responsibility. So I always remind everybody that start with that. And if that is taken care of, then, if I'm a squad leader, there's things I can do with my squad that are separate from platoon, company, battalion, brigade, wow. Okay. We just got loud. That was much better. I was whispering before, but anyway, there's things that I can do in addition to the training schedule that's dictated for me. And that requires dedication. If you're going to do the minimum, then you're going to get the minimum results. Now, on a macro level, which is the chief and I are super passionate about this, we're trying to create a culture of training, like real training. And right now, I'll take 350-1 for an example. Last year, we started 350-1. That's the manual that basically dictates everything you're responsible for as a leader. It was 280 plus pages of requirements, of things to do. Okay, well, you and I both know how much time is in a week, is in a month, is in a year. We've dropped that down to below 100 pages now.
Oh, wow.
And the whole purpose is to allow leaders at those junior levels to get some white space back on their calendar to get back to ruthless training, right? There's some things you're always going to have to white card. We're struggling to fly UAS in certain locations because of FAA regulations, but there's nothing, you can't blame the FAA for not being able to road march. You can't blame the FAA for not going to the field at night and practicing nighttime maneuvers. There's just some things you have to own yourself before you blame higher.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point, and I'll reinforce that. I'll assume you haven't heard this episode, but a couple years ago, I did an episode with a rising sergeant major in the Marine Corps, and I asked him, what's a great way for a new emerging leader to come in and evaluate a unit that they have just joined, if they're a platoon sergeant or a platoon commander, platoon leader, the same vernacular.
Right.
And his response was, if you want to know what kind of unit you have just taken over, go to the armory, draw weapons, and do a reaction, a quick reaction,
Yep.
contact right, and
Yep.
see what happens. And
Yep.
you'll know everything you need to know about where you need to start your training out. And you're right. And one of the other quotes from your article, and I'll link to this in the show notes so people can go back and reference it, was he said, for several formations not focused on their warfighting mission, the path of least resistance is the most traveled. There is no time in battle to become disciplined. It happens before or not at all. That change in focus could take a decade or two to really wash out of the culture of any service, right?
Oh, yeah.
How can leaders speed that up, and where can they take that sharp turn in change? Where can that sharp turn really take place right now for somebody who's listening to this?
Wow. Well, I think the most impact is still at the battalion level. If you and I were a battalion command team and we were just coming in, I think in a 24 to 36 month period of time, because to your point, some of these things didn't get this way overnight, right? This is some just leftover GWAT. That's what I call it. It's like long COVID. It's like long GWAT. It's not a coin fight. We're not driving around in up armored Humvees. We're going back to the same valley again that we were at 18 months ago. This is training for the hardest thing that we could ever potentially have to do, right? Large scale combat operations. And so as a battalion commander and a battalion CSM, I think there should be first 30 days, we're assessing our battalion. Honest to God, report card. If it's C's and D's, it's C's and D's. We're not going to cook the books. We're going to own it. And then we're going to set some objectives and we're going to be ruthless in achieving those. Ruthless. And there's going to be some leaders inside that formation that are confused about what's happening. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. I've been there.
Yeah.
It changed my entire perspective of what right was and how to truly measure yourself. We don't actually like to measure ourselves in this space because it's ugly. It really is ugly. And we're infatuated with empirical data right now. Okay, well, we have empirical data, to your point. Like, we know if we're really good at night and if we're really lethal at night or if we aren't. And so that's why I think there's opportunity for leaders at those echelons to step in and get aggressive with what we're talking about. Because again, the best time to plant a tree was when? 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So the next best time is right now. Don't waste 120 days in command. Get after it day one, but evaluate first. And then that way you have fresh data that doesn't necessarily character assassinate the people we replaced, because you don't want to do that. That's not edifying. You just want a baseline, and then you can set your vision and set some goals.
Yeah, that's fantastic, because to leaders who are listening to this right now, and let's just stay at the battalion level because it's relatable to a lot of people, that if you're a commander in a battalion, I guess it could be any unit, but the trees you're climbing right now were planted 20 or 30 years ago.
Yes.
And I think it's inherent in every leader to go out and plant those new trees right now for someone else to be climbing like you're climbing them right now.
That is a specified task. We're obligated to do that.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that I think makes it so, now I'm speaking from my civilian mindset and experience, but things are very measurable in the civilian world because for the most part, you're dealing with some sort of profit and loss. You can measure money in and money out. And in the military, it's really hard to measure success. You can say, like, well, we went out and had a great training exercise, but you can't really say why. Or you can say, we had a great training exercise because nobody got hurt. Or we didn't damage any equipment. Okay, those things are all great. I don't know if it really measures the success of everything. And for the past 20 years of people who are, a little sore over the fact that maybe there was a lot of green gumballs being shown in PowerPoint presentations to higher leaders that weren't necessarily green. And you're talking about, geez, we really need to go in and do the hard assessment. I think one of the challenging things that leaders have is, what are the things that are measurable in your unit? And maybe you can take a few minutes to talk about, in the context of, the large scale combat operations that we should be refocusing on right now, my opinion, probably yours too.
Yes.
What are some of those things that they should be trying to measure that maybe for the past 20 years we haven't been measuring?
Well, two things. because part of that depends on the formation we're in, right? If we're a sustainment battalion or a sustainment brigade or organization, it's going to look a little different than, if you and I have, a brigade and a battalion inside, the 82nd Airborne. It's going to look a little different. Or in Third Corps, or, we have a heavy brigade. It's going to look a little different, right? And that's okay, because all of that has to work to win.
Right.
All of it. And then if you and I are in the National Guard or the reserves, we have 39 days to figure all that out, and it has to work and win, because we're going to fight a large scale combat operation from a total Army perspective, not just the active component. So it's all got to fit. But I would tell you, there's some humility in truly seeing yourself. If you can see yourself and you set real objectives, then you're going to expose when you fail. You're going to expose when you fail to your leaders. Your leadership's going to see that. We do not coach and model that very well. We have a tendency, to your point, to, I would say, compromise, and it's all in on getting that bubble from yellow to green. And I struggle with that. I had a commander once tell me, he's now retired, that he said, Mike, I just want you to know the exercise that's coming up that we're going to EDRI you for, there's no way you're going to succeed. We have completely set this thing up for you to fail. And I said, challenge accepted. And that thing was 6 months, and we didn't know exactly what it was. And that's a mindset, though. That type of a mindset is required at each one of the echelons. And that's some of the cultural piece we got to change, right? Am I setting training up so that I don't fail because I'm afraid to expose what we're not good at? That's a problem.
Yes, I agree. And I think, and I learned this in my civilian world more than I learned it in my military world, because you're right. I think training is set up to make sure that, I'll just say it like this, nobody looks bad. Right. Okay. So in my world, in the civilian world, what I've learned is that I celebrate the failures in so much as they give me correctable actions to implement so it doesn't happen again. And I think that's a cultural mindset that has to happen. So who takes the first step on that? Is it you all pushing it down? Do you think it just bubbles up? Is it a grassroots leadership from the bottom up?
No, I really do think, like, I'll use our CTCs, I'll use our combat training centers as an example, because right now they're literally the vignette of what we're talking about, right? They're a safe place to go experiment. It's a crucible. No other army on the globe throws a brigade into that crucible and says, good luck. But you're most likely going to get your butt kicked by Black Horse or Geronimo or Warrior. It's okay. I'm not going to crush you on your OER or your NCOER. I just want to make sure you're learning as you're getting crushed each day, right? That starts really, honestly, for us, it starts at the force comm level. That right now, that's General Pappas, all the way down to, we'll say, pick your corps down to your division, right? Now, now you shouldn't go down there and fail the basics, which is where I go down and visit and get a little frustrated, because it exposes some home station training weakness, if you will, right? But when you go down there and you're handling, multi-domain operations, complex operations with an OP4 like Black Horse or Geronimo out at NTC or JRTC, and you're actually having positive effects against them, now that's a huge win. But I'm here to tell you, you're still going to rack up a bunch of things that they kicked your butt on, because they're really good, and they're going to teach you. The best lessons are still usually the ones that don't go well in training and in combat. Unfortunately, some of the AARs, the after action reports that have stung the most, are associated with memorials, and that unfortunately will create generational learning, if you will, right? But the goal is to do that in training, not on an objective that went wrong.
I totally agree. I just think it's hard to be a leader and realize that so much of your career could be based on your, let's just say, 2 years in command of something. It's you just become such a micromanager and risk avoider. But to your article's point, there's no time to be dealing with that when the bullets are flying.
No.
And through your lens as a senior leader in the Army now, and having been a senior leader in the Army for a very long time, are you able to generally break down what are those traits that derail leaders and cause them to fail? I mean, I know there's the obvious ones like DUIs and things like that. Try to go a little bit deeper on that, and what are some things that you see derail leaders from a not so obvious perspective?
I kind of alluded to, I see leadership as a journey, and it's got seasons, definitely has seasons.
That's a great way to put it.
I think sometimes the more senior we become, the more comfortable we become. And there's risk with that. Comfort breeds complacency. You see it in moderate to more senior leaders who their physical fitness drops off. Their willingness to learn new things, right? Like I tell everybody, don't lose that sense of curiosity. Stay curious, ask questions, be willing to learn something new, study something new. You know, when you get to the age I'm at right now, heck, I just think it's good for brain health. But I think complacency and hubris are two things I see that are pitfalls that I myself have even struggled with and am not, impervious to hitting those potholes on the journey. That's why I say it's a journey. There's no permanent destination. But those are the two I see the most. I think there's a little bit, sometimes you get micromanagers. I see that, which has a tendency, not always, but has a tendency to my way is the right way. I'm the most experienced. So you get labeled a little bit more of a, I don't want to say it's not necessarily a toxic leader, but a counterproductive leader, because now you're not willing to, we all know the deal. There's probably 3 ways to solve a problem, and some leaders just always think theirs is the best one. As a leader, if you don't give your subordinates an opportunity to use one of their ideas and then you help them be successful, turn that into a coachable moment, you're just going to become known as the leader that always has the right answer. So the staff will literally placate to you and just backwards plan everything they do to the idea that you already probably seeded when you gave your guidance. And so I think there's some, those are a couple dangers, if you will, because in the end, combat is always going to be complex. It's never going to be the way you planned it. And the best plan is just going to provide you a common platform from which to audible off of, because you're going to audible off of it every time.
Right. And that's where that word intent comes in all the time, understanding commander's intent and things like that. And, intent is really great for calling that audible.
Yep.
So long as your subordinate leaders, subordinate young leaders, and I'm specifically going to talk about officer and enlisted, I'm going to go like 02, 03, maybe 05, and then E5, E6 level subordinate leaders. It's great as long as they understand how you think as a commander or a senior leader.
Hugely important.
Yeah. So how do you teach that to a young leader to understand how you would think when you're not around?
So again, back to training, right? And this is mission command. Like we're talking pure mission command right here, right? I think it was it Dunford that wrote his memo on mission command that I still think I have a copy of that I appreciate, right? So I personally think you've got to give your subordinate leaders opportunities to fail. And because then it becomes a coachable moment, right? Because in the heat of it, in large scale combat in particular, when you're not going to be able to micromanage them, if they don't understand intent and they're not willing and feel empowered and emboldened to make decisions when something changes, they're surely not going to do it. When bullets are flying, one-way US is coming in, incoming is nonstop, EW's live and well, all the things that are super complex. Provide them the opportunity to do some thinking, and then you provide some input for coaching. And then, to be honest with you, you end up having to do less and less of that. Now, there's the reality. When you do that, you're also going to help identify the junior commanders or command teams that need a little extra verifying, right? We trust but verify. You want to do all of that before you get called to go do something real. You're going to have, if you're a battalion commander, you're liable to have, half of your companies, your leadership might be fire and forget. I give them intent and they execute superbly. But now, I've got a couple of them I need a little extra supervision with. That's all to be sorted out in training.
Yeah. That's the best time to do it. I recall a personal time where I was out in the field when I was a commanding officer, and I gathered all the officers up and said, "We're dead. Tell the remaining
Yep.
members of the unit. They're in charge of getting us back from the range, and
Yep.
we will reconvene with them at 0800
Yep.
and took all the officers and put them in a 5-ton and took them away from the field op. And we didn't come back until 8 o'clock the next morning. Like no officer supervision for almost 24 hours.
Yeah.
And it was such a great learning experience because, well, first of all, they had a different appreciation for what other leaders were doing in the unit, but they learned so much themselves. And that brings me to a question. There's so much leadership that takes place at the junior level. One of the things that's different in the Marines than in the Army is that at E4, you can be an NCO or not be an NCO. And it seems to me that more people are specialists than corporals, but I would think that you would want more corporals and specialists just from a triangular leadership, the triangle of leadership. Can you talk about what your preference is for as an institution, the Army? Do you want more corporals, or do you have enough? Does that system work, or are you encouraging more soldiers to really do what it needs to take to become a corporal versus a specialist?
Yeah, it's a little bit different in the Army. So, as a matter of fact, right now the regulation states that once you're PME qualified as an E4, you as a specialist, you have to go back and become a corporal,
Okay.
regardless of your duty position, which for some of them means they're changing their uniforms and having everything resewn. And 6 months later, they're making E5 and then they're paying to do it again. So for us, it's a little bit different. We have used it in the way in which you're speaking, which is, when you identify that E4 that just has the propensity to lead and you want to make them a fire team leader. And you're like, hey, Specialist Weimer, you're now going to be Corporal Weimer. I'm going to make you a junior NCO. It's probably the sweetest rank there is in the military, if you will, because you're wearing two mosquito wings and you've got responsibility, but you're not quite yet a non-commissioned officer. And so the infantry units, I would say, combat arms units probably still use it in a little more of that traditional way that you're referencing in the Army. But for us, because we're accelerating troops so fast at the junior ranks, because the hottest grade plate in the United States Army is still the E6. We need E6s for everything, that they really don't spend any time as corporals.
How about in your community, in the special operations community? Are there many specialists in that community, or is everybody a corporal, or are you promoted so fast that it really doesn't factor in?
No, if you're 18 series, you'll come out of the end of the Q course in language school. You'll come out as a E5. You'll come out. You skip right through that.
That makes sense. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about your time in the special operations community, because I find the leadership there so fascinating. You're just dealing with a different level of people. You're dealing with less people who are obviously very qualified, smart, and screen very well. But I don't look at the special operations community as having a lot of mavericks, right? And I really like to ask my guests this question because the military has this really funny way of revering mavericks. Like Chesty Puller, I would imagine, was somewhat of a maverick in the Marine Corps. I mean, I think people like that, and we revere them, but maybe not at the time. When we look at them through the lens of history, we look at them as mavericks. And in fact, we make movies with fictional characters named Maverick in Top Gun. And so at the same time, the military doesn't seem very tolerant of them. They kind of revere them. I'm wondering what a maverick looks like in your community, and to the extent that one exists or ever existed in your life. How have you ever had one in your command, and how did you handle that, become tolerant of them, and actually coach them up to be not I don't want to say troublemaker, but sometimes mavericks can be mavericks.
So this is an interesting one, because there's different definitions of a maverick. Yeah, we definitely have them in our community. I would say I love history. So I, like you, maybe, I don't know, I won't speak for you, but I've always been attracted to the maverick.
Me too.
I just have. I mean, I grew up, laying on the living room floor as an Army brat, reading Mac V. Sog books. I was infatuated with what Mac V. Sog did, which is probably why I ended up choosing the route that I did. But most of the good books were written about, the small teams, or the leader that ran the small teams that were known for just signing up for the craziest stuff. And it was always a maverick involved in that, right? Still, I don't think changed. But one of the common threads, I think mavericks have the ability to thrive in times of conflict. Mavericks, like you're referencing, struggle in peacetime.
Mm-hmm.
The organizations are just, I'll probably get myself in trouble here for this one, but you need some mavericks. Like we used to say, hey, put that person encase them in glass and have the hammer really close by to break if this next thing goes live.
Right.
But leave them in glass until then, because right now they're driving me crazy. Like they just scream risk. But then all of a sudden we get asked to go do something that requires a maverick, if you will, but more of a sense of like that warrior ethos that we all like to think we have. I've said it a couple times. I might as well say it for you too. I think everybody really wants to be part of the 300, but they really don't want to put the work in to be a member of the 300.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it comes to doing what you have to do, when you get asked to go do it, they don't have what's inside them to go execute. Those are the mavericks that I grew up with that struggle in peacetime. And so you take the last 20 some years of GWAT, and a lot of them have thrived, not necessarily into leadership roles, but because they were able to stay at those operator levels for 20 years when they probably should have, as E9s, already moved out because there were no leadership positions for them. They still thrived because there was always the need to go to the sound of the guns.
So that brings me to my next question, still staying in your special operations community mindset here with this question. But one of the things that fascinates me, and I talked to Dave Isom about this too. Yeah, he was a great episode. And I know you guys are personal friends. Actually, shout out to him for him introducing us. Thanks.
Yeah.
I asked him the same question, so I'll be curious what your answer is. But when assessments in your community result in the best of the best, and even in your world, and again, asked Dave the same question, which was you have the assessments to become a Green Beret, and you're finding and then you assess into a different unit that's even higher than that. Yep. And we all know what we're talking about here, but so now you've got the 1% of the 1%. And so when you have a unit that's the top 1%, what's different about leadership in those units? Because there has to be some challenges there. What's different leading in that organization versus, say, like a tank battalion or an infantry battalion?
It's 10 times harder.
See, that's what I think the answer is too. That's why I like asking the question.
So it can be 10 times harder for certain things and then 10 times easier in others, right? And so, I can remember my first day of officially being done with the selection and the training course and going to the actual squadron that I was selected for. And I was told, I'll never forget this, welcome to being average for the first time in your life. And I was like, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. Well, I found out within 30 days what that meant, because we would do a thing called the Sergeant Major Day every month. And sometimes the Sergeant Major Day would be 6-8 hours long. And you were like, you hope you weren't broken at the end of it. You were in full kit. You're probably crawling through a tunnel in a pro mask. You're shooting, you're carrying around, all this equipment. You're doing the obstacle course. It's like 6 hours of what we thought was fun, but most people would think is hell. And then all your scores are posted on the board, publicly posted. There's no hiding. Like you're evaluated every month, and you are ranked with your peers. And I understood what it meant to be average. And that was step one, right? How do you lead where you're no longer the best at everything and everybody's gunning for you? That's challenging. That was new, and that is not normal in most units. And that's not to offend anybody in other units. But that wasn't even normal in 7th Special Forces Group where I grew up. So then the next thing I would tell you, when you move into the ranks of leadership, and I didn't move into a leadership position until 7 years of being in this organization. So that's 7 years of a training schedule, like I just articulated to you, with nonstop deployments to combat. Now you have to lead those people. Like the level of competition can get out of control. because winning matters so much that it can almost take over and be the thing. But in combat, everybody's got to win, right? Because it's a live organization that's trying to solve a wicked hard problem. But when you're back in garrison, it has a tendency to be all about your performance. And so leading through that became incredibly sporty. We'll go with that, right? Because you got strong personalities. Everybody's A-type. Everybody's the best of their class. Everybody wants a challenge, to include potentially challenging the leader, who doesn't always have the best idea because everyone around you is just as smart as you are.
Or more experienced even.
Well, even more experienced. I mean, like I had, as an assault team leader, I was a E8 for a while, and we have E9s that would work for us because we're not a rank structured organization. It's literally a meritocracy. Like we talk meritocracy. That place is meritocracy.
Yeah.
And which is very different. And so leading in that environment, you have to bring your A game every day, because if you show any weakness, there's a shark somewhere in that formation that may try to take advantage or test you.
Oh, got so many follow-up questions here. When you said that you were 7 years, I don't know, in the Marine Corps, we use the word, term Joe Snuffy, right? You're just a snuffy,
Yeah.
You're right. You're just a guy in the stack with a gun.
Yep.
And then you enter into a leadership position. I could phrase the question a little bit more delicately. I won't, because it won't have the impact that I want it to have. But what makes somebody want to be a leader in that unit and take themselves out of the stack? Like, is it the best of the best aspire to be in a leadership role in a squadron? Or is it the people who are average say, like, well, my way out of being average is to get into leadership?
Well, it doesn't work that way at that organization. The best of the best are gonna be even considered for those leadership positions. The average folks, they can stay right where they're at, and there's no time limit to it. I could have stayed there for 10, 11, 12 years and not moved into a leadership position, but I was talent managed into a leadership position. So it's very different in that type of an organization. I would argue it's a more similar to probably some of the stuff you had in the business world. Is, some people want to be a leader. Some people have the attributes to be a leader. And then some people have the capability and the attributes to be a phenomenal follower all the time.
Yeah, that's a fantastic answer. So when you say you were talent managed in a leadership, replay for me the moment somebody came up and tapped you on the shoulder and said, Mike, I kind of see you as being a leader here. What do you think?
Well, you're being considered because you're talent managed into a second in charge, a 2IC position. The same thing happens in most of the SOF units, right? So in some of the organizations within SOF, it has nothing to do with your rank. It has everything to do with your time in the organization, doing the job, and then your reputation that precedes you. In a lot of SOF units, it's the opposite. It's like, hey, you just got promoted from a centralized promotion system thing that's over here. So now down at the tactical level, it says I have to now talent manage you into a leadership position. There are some organizations out there that I've worked for that they don't operate that way. There's no centralized process that's deeming who's the next leader at the tactical level. We do that internally based off your performance from the last 5 years. And if you're talent managed into that second in charge position, that next 2 years is your interview, your live interview to be potentially talent managed into that, ultimately that leadership position.
There's so much about what you said that makes me want to ask, what components of leadership in the special operations community could be applied into the conventional leadership, the conventional units and the leadership there that isn't yet being integrated? When you talk about posting scores and things like that, I wonder if some of the problems with leadership are that we just don't have 360-degree reviews like we do in the civilian community. We don't really know where we stand relative to everybody else. And it's almost like it's private. Is there some sort of component of that could be implemented into a conventional unit that would work well?
Yeah, I think there's probably some aspects of it. But again, you got to keep in mind that a couple of these different SOF organizations they're one-offs. They are absolutely one-offs. They're unique. If you try to take that model and throw it somewhere else, I would argue probably 9 out of 10 times it's going to be a catastrophic failure, right? It's an experiment that's been going on in a couple of these organizations for, a couple of them upwards of 40 years. They're learning. They're always getting better. I guarantee if the plank holders to a couple of those units told you what the first 5 years was like, it wouldn't be like we're talking about now. There's a, you know what I mean? There's a process. We always tend to talk about how it is now, but we don't talk about how hard it was to plow the ground and plant the seed, back to the trees, if you will, trees analogy. But I do think there's some aspects. And so on the talent management side, we're trying some of that now in the Army, but the scope and scale of the Army requirements from Korea to Poland, they're so massive. I have a whole new appreciation for it in my last 4.5 years of what I've been doing as a sergeant major, to where now I understand, we try to get the right person in the right job at the right time, but then somebody has a medical issue or somebody decides to retire or a conflict rises somewhere on the globe and priorities shift and units change and, or somebody has a family member that they have to raise their hand and say, hey, I have a family member that's ill. I have to retire. And then the dominoes drop. And so this perfect plan you had with each person starts to collapse. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't try, to your point. We should absolutely try. And that's where we're at now. But sustaining it for the amount of requirements we have globally is wicked hard.
Yeah. Going back to your time with Special Mission Unit, you can stay there as long as you want to. You can be a follower forever.
Yep.
I may have mixed that up a little bit, but
no, you can.
The officers cannot do that though, right?
No.
Officers are rotating in and out. So I'm curious, can you compare and contrast the leadership between the officer side and the enlisted side in the special operations community? I think it's different than the regular Army. Is it more role defined than rank defined? Can you compare and contrast the different leadership challenges and opportunities there between the enlisted and the officers?
Yeah, it is unique. There's been a couple different people that have tried to even write about it a little bit. I heard one individual tried to articulate it like commandership. Like what's the difference between leadership and commandership? I loved debating him a little bit on it because there was some there in what he was trying to articulate. I think you're alluding to it a little bit too. But it is an NCO-led organization, but the commanders are the commanders, right? And so how do you skin that? Like I have this brand new, I have these young 04s who are the best of the best, and I'm a little biased. I just acknowledge that up front. I am a little biased. Sometimes it may cause me to sway one way or the other, so I have to say it out loud every now and then so I don't default to it. But they're phenomenal.
Yeah.
But they're new.
Enjoying Moments in Leadership? Help the project get more guests and reach more listeners by leaving a 5-star rating and a quick review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It takes 5 or 10 seconds to do, and the reviews really help me to continue bringing inspiring stories from senior leaders. And additionally, when guests see that it's popular or hear about it around their commands, it helps me get them on as guests too. So finally, if you're able to chip in a little bit to help the project, please head over to my Supercast support page through the link in the show notes because every little bit helps. Now back to the pod.
And now you're going to come into an organization that has somebody like me that's been there 9 years, 10 years, 11 years, 90% of that in combat, and you're the new commander. And oh, by the way, there's 70 others like me, but you're in charge. That's a crucible. That's a leadership crucible. And so how we select those officers really plays into whether they have a high propensity to be successful or are they going to struggle? Because if you come into that and try to lead that as if you were in a battalion in the, the 101st or, the 82nd, it's probably not going to work all that well, right? I go back to the journey those people have been on for 10 years to get where they are and to still be there, right? Because remember, you're being assessed sometimes every month, sometimes every 6 months. Throw a deployment in there. You got more stripes on your right sleeve than you do your left sleeve when it comes to overseas combat tours. That is a challenging place to come in. And so you have to remind commanders, hey, you're in charge. You are the commander. Do not let any of the young Mike Weimers or even older Mike Weimers try to take advantage of that, you're in charge. And I used to even counsel my commanders when I was an instructor that were my students that were getting ready to go be commanders. I would remind them, you're not one of the fellas, you're the commander. And you've got to figure out how to build a relationship with some of the most talented warfighters in the world quickly. But you have to remember you're the commander. You got to call balls and strikes. Because back to some of these, to include myself for a little while, right? Keep in case of glass, break in time of bullets are flying.
Right.
How do you lead that in between those events where the bullets are flying becomes the challenge for those commanders. But man, it was so fun to watch them just be successful, and they're so stinking good.
Yeah, I've said this on podcasts before where I'll just take a basic staff sergeant and second lieutenant. Every single chief of the Army or commandant of the Marine Corps starts out as a second lieutenant somewhere. And that E6, that platoon sergeant, we call them platoon sergeants, but that E6 has such a massive impact on the development of that officer that I'm telling you right now, there is an E6 in the Army who has the future chief of the Army as a second lieutenant right now.
Absolutely.
It's just right. And the other thing that's really interesting too, and I should have asked you that, I should have brought this up in the very beginning when I was asking about PFC Weimer, but your replacement probably is sitting out there right now. Well, we say swabbing the decks in the Marines, but you know what I mean? Like cleaning something and wondering about his future in the Army. And that person will be replacing you at some point. Yeah. But a lot of what you just said about don't forget you're the commander, don't forget you're the one calling balls and strikes.
Yep.
I think that advice is completely applicable to the conventional unit, to the new lieutenant, the new captain, the new battalion
100%.
commander. Yeah. And not being one of the guys is really, really hard.
It is, and I think it's even harder in SOF because you want to fit in, right? You want to be accepted into a small organization that, my gosh, I had guys that worked for me that carried me out on litters. I had guys that worked for me that helped me put tourniquets on me. I bandaged them. I carried them out on. How do you coming into that close of a knit group? We talk cohesive. That's cohesive. Yeah. Godfathers to your kids and our wives it is tight. By the way, you're the new guy. Yes, you're in charge, but how do you win that respect quickly? And the first way they win that respect is they go through the same course the NCO does, and they have to do the same standards as the NCO, in addition to some other things they have to do as commanders. And that's how they start the journey. And then I used to just remind them, don't lose that. Remember, you're not one of the fellas, but you want to win the respect of them, and they'll do anything. They'll storm hell with a water pistol for you if you get this right.
My follow-up question to you is going to be, what's your advice to a new young officer coming into a special missions unit? But you just answered it. So the second part of my question was going to be, what is your advice to the very seasoned NCO at one of those units that's getting a new officer?
Onboard them as quickly as possible. If that new officer, commander, I'm their counterpart, regardless of what the organization structure looks like, I truly do believe, whether it's a specified task or an implied task, one of my jobs is to onboard them as quickly as possible. I have the knowledge of the organization, the people, the subordinate leaders, the culture. What are we good at? What are we not good at? Where were we in the training cycle before you got here? That's my job. My job is to get them up to speed as quickly as possible. Because remember, readiness is this roller coaster, right? It just is. And the goal is to never drop so far in your readiness, both individual and unit, that you're starting completely over again. And there's a tendency during leadership swaps when a unit unfortunately has so many leaders swap out at the same time, it's almost like you're at the bottom again, starting the whole journey over. And if you don't have to do that because it's, just one or two leaders swapping out, the people that are still there remaining, it's our job to get those new leaders up to speed as quickly as possible.
After having listened to the last 20 minutes of us talking about your time in the Special Operations community, I'm wondering if, looking back through the lens as the Sergeant Major of the Army, or even before you were the Sergeant Major of the Army, what conventional leadership wisdom do you find most flawed and why?
Yeah, I don't think it's inevitable. I'll probably get myself in trouble here also.
Well, your PA will take care of it if you get yourself in trouble. We'll just edit
Yeah.
it out.
Well, I think one of the biggest things that I struggle with in conventional special operations and in the conventional Army is, well, that's just the way we've always done it.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably the top of the list. There's some other things in there. Well, that's too hard. Well, we've never done it that way before, or this is just the way we've always done it. Those are probably a few at the top. None of those will probably get me in too much trouble, but I think there's this misconception that, leadership in the special ops is so much different than leadership in a conventional unit or heck, even in the civilian world for that matter. I mean, when you take leadership down to just the bare essence of what it is, I mean, it's influencing people to accomplish something, right? You gotta win their trust. You gotta, not to turn this into a John Maxwell, Jim Collins conversation,
Right.
but it really is at the simplest form. It's people business, right? And so I think there are a lot of lessons that transfer over to all those units, whether you and I are in a sustainment, support element, or we're in an infantry brigade, or we're in a special operations unit, MARSOC, Green Berets, whatever, they're relevant. And I think sometimes we overcomplicate what we're talking about here.
So, what do you see coming in the future that our current talent should be weighing very carefully right now, looking forward? I'm going to say next 15 years.
What do you mean? Like what, leaders?
Yeah, like what do you see coming in the future in terms of changes in combat, changes in the makeup of the battlefield, things like that, that our current talent needs to be weighing very carefully as they're making training decisions or leadership decisions or even big strategic decisions, people sitting in the Pentagon figuring stuff out?
Yeah. So my biggest concern is complacency.
Mm-hmm.
We've got unbelievable lessons observed right now from places like Ukraine, Israel with Gaza, Israel with Lebanese Hezbollah, Israel with Iran, all the proxy organizations inside Iraq, with the Houthis, what's going on down in the Houthis in the Red Sea. I mean, we have no shortages of lessons observed, right? But the key is to take an observed lesson, do something with it, train with it, change the way we're doing something. Could be doctrine, for example, but practice it at a combat training rotation, practice it at your home station. Then you turn it into a lesson learned. Because my concern is we are going to do less around the globe, and that's okay because we're maxed out with requirements. Just for the record, like we're meeting our requirements, but we're maxed out. And I've always been a quality over quantity guy. We need to be really good at what we say we can do, right? So good that it's scary. Nobody wants to mess with us. I mean, that's really the essence of deterrence, if you will, because if we're not good and nobody's scared about going head to head with us, are they deterred? Right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we can overcomplicate that conversation too, but I get worried about complacency. And, I was in the Army in the 90s, and I don't think we were complacent in the 90s in the special ops community, because the special ops there was always something going on somewhere in the world, right? You think of your, low intensity kind of conflict mindset in the special ops, but in the conventional Army, preparing for a LISCO fight, I just don't want people to get complacent, and that can creep in relatively. It can be sneaky.
It can be sneaky. I have a very quick personal story I'll share with you, but I was commissioned in 1990 and just barely missed the Gulf War.
Mm.
So when all the units came rotating back from being overseas, the war that was being fought in training was the same thing, right? Fighting the last war.
Yep.
And then I got recalled off of Thanksgiving leave to deploy to issue. And so now, after all this time in the desert in 29 Palms, California, very similar to NTC, fighting the same sort of linear battlefield, right hook, kind of left hook sort of thinking, here I am in a city with windows and buildings and doors and vehicles and civilians who were carrying rifles that were allowed to carry rifles. And I just remember thinking to myself, my God, I just spent the past 2 years training for Desert Storm 2, and here I am in an urban environment.
Yeah.
And it was a massive wake-up call to me as a young first lieutenant leading patrols down the street.
And that's why I'm passionate about the basics, because we've never had our crystal ball right.
Never.
I mean, it's not once have we had it right. And so, I mean, in my heart of hearts, to this day, the best indicator of future performance is still past performance. And so I know if we're really good at the basics and we can do combined arms maneuver because we're good at the basics, whether that's back in a desert environment or, God forbid it's in an urban environment, we'll figure it out. But if we compromise on the basics, the complex, chaotic scenarios are going to be an issue for us, and so that's why I'm ruthless with those.
Yeah, that goes back to the episode with my sergeant major who said, if you want to know what kind of unit you're walking into, just go out in the parking lot and do an immediate action drill. But I've got a few more questions as we wrap up here towards the end of your hard stop. But one more about your combat experience, and then just a couple more general questions. But I'm wondering if you can recall a moment where you experienced fear. There were some. And how can you use an example of what you experienced to help young leaders prepare themselves for those inevitable moments that they will face in a fearful situation?
Oof. Well, I think I'll go backwards on that one first, and then I'll tell you the quick little story.
Sure.
Because it happens, right? I think there's a misunderstanding of what fear is supposed to do for you and why we have it. I think I figured this out probably when I was about my second year as a 2IC, maybe, if you will, because fear started to be an indicator that something was about to happen or something wasn't normal, and I learned to use it. I learned to get back to that. I now have a little bit of leadership responsibility. And so I had some reps and sets under my belt, and something was different. I just had a sense of something wasn't right, and I didn't ignore it. I learned not to ignore it. Right. And so I think, heck, that was probably, 2006, 2007 timeframe. So this is a while ago. Mm-hmm. That's when I started to rethink what the purpose of fear is. I also have teenage daughters, so there was fear. There was fear there in my own house too. Raising, trying to be a good dad and a good husband, not failing in that leadership role. There was fear there too, but I learned to not ignore it or try to get rid of it, because I think there's this goal out there where people are like, I'm not supposed to be scared of anything, and I'm like, I'm not what you're reading or listening to podcast wise, but I recommend you change that, because that's not true. Fear really causes you to have respect and understand risk, and it makes sure you're mitigating it properly, because without that, I'm pretty sure you're going to end up in situations that you're not prepared for. You're probably going to put people in harm's way and get people hurt. So the first time I ever really sensed it, was probably exiting an aircraft, perfectly good aircraft at 12,500 feet. Was like, this is absolutely ridiculous. And we exited the aircraft, and I conquered that fear, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. Now I would love to be able to go do that tomorrow, because there's, not that I wouldn't have any fear, because I respect emergency procedures, proper exit, what could happen if this doesn't go well. I got to be prepared. So the fear is not gone, but the first time you do that, there's always a little like, what the heck am I doing here? And then the first time I ever really sensed it in combat was the very first mission we did in Afghanistan. I think it was April 2002. It wasn't that long after Takagar. We were infilling after a long 47 helo ride. We were just taking rounds on infill, hope we land and get off this thing before it gets shot. That was probably the first time in combat.
Anybody wants to hear my answer to that question, go back to episode 1. If I thought that the moment in my life that was happening at that time in Mogadishu, I'd still be talking about it 30 years later as a formative moment in my life, I would have never believed you. But now it's just, and it echoes everything that you just said. Wrapping up here, sort of a human interest question. It's sort of like, here's what the people want to know, kind of thing. Can you, it's just, it's a personal question. Can you talk about the moment someone said to you, hey, you're going to be the sergeant major of the Army. I mean, that's a big deal, right? Like, you talk about 1% of the 1%, you're it. You're the top of the triangle. Somebody at some point must have come to you and said, hey, got to talk to you about something. Come into my office. What was that like, and who was it with?
Well, it wasn't nearly like that, but the event did happen. Well, the process to become the sergeant major of the Army, I got to give SMA Grinson huge kudos. He wanted to. He knew because he felt it personally in his first year, all the way through his third year. Like, hey, this is a rucksack like no other, and he didn't feel like he had been fully prepared for it. And so he had our commander's assessment program, CAP, as most of your listeners will know it as. He had the CAP cadre develop a CAP for all the candidates. And so I think there was 14 or 15 of us, but we basically went through a week of assessments. And back to you, a comment you said earlier, I didn't think I was qualified, but I was encouraged that I should compete. And at first I didn't take it very seriously, but then I got told, no, we're being very serious. We think you should compete. And I was like, whoa, okay. I'm addicted to competing. Back to my entire, all I know is assessments.
Yeah.
Probably to a fault, to be honest with you. But so I assessed, and I guess I assessed okay. So that group of people was trimmed down to another group, and then finally there was 3 of us left. And oh, by the way, these are all my teammates who I'm super close with to this day. And most of them work for me in some capacity, and they're again phenomenal teammates. I couldn't do anything that people think I do on this job without them, and most of them are on the Senior Enlisted Council, for the record. They're phenomenal teammates. But then it came down to 3 of us, and it was announced at the Army Professional Forum. And it was very simple. The chief called us up and he said, hey, we've made a decision. This is, I'm not going to say what the chief said exactly, but we've chosen. And hey, Command Sergeant Major Weimer's going to be the next Sergeant Major of the Army. And to be honest with you, I think my heart stopped because I immediately was like, holy cow, how am I going to explain this to my wife?
Yeah.
And that was the first person I went and called. I told her, sit down. I got something to tell you.
Yeah.
But to be honest with you, I still can't even believe I'm sitting here having this conversation with you about being selected to be the Sergeant Major of the Army. I don't think it's something you ever should put on your wall as a thing you want to be. Honestly, I still coach and I hope mentor and teach and model. Just put your head down and do a great job where you're at. Be all in where you're at. If you're a squad leader right now, go all in on that. If you're a battalion or brigade sergeant major, go all in on that. And in the end, if you're meant to move to the next level, right, you have the potential to work at the next level, that should be identified. Somebody will capture that and you'll be talent managed to the next level. If you try to attain something that you're not designed for or prepared for, it'll hurt you and it'll hurt the organization. And so I think some of these more senior positions, they're not goals to achieve. They just become opportunities that other senior leaders identify you for as having potential.
Yeah. Well, in 2055, when now PFC Smith, who just heard what you had to say, is sitting in your shoes, I hope they say the same thing. So,
all right.
Well, we're wrapping up here. Let's just wrap it up with what sort of message to the force do you have?
Well, I'll tell you right now, the glass is half full. Recruiting has finally turned a corner, and I didn't celebrate a lot last year because I wanted to see sustained progress, and we're seeing sustained progress right now. I'm super, super proud of U.S. Army Recruiting Command and really the Army writ large for getting after a wicked hard problem, right? And so again, the glass is half full there. I've seen the last 2 years, we published the Blue Book, and I'm seeing people get back to the basics. I'm hearing and I'm watching people master the fundamentals again. I'm watching people start to hold each other accountable because, again, a Blue Book without accountability is useless. And so we're starting to see that, right? In the 4 focus areas, are no longer just bumper stickers. I'm seeing people all in on war fighting. I'm seeing people go all in on what it means to be a member of the profession, our fourth focus area. And so I'm actually very encouraged. True deterrence is when we buy into that, right? We move a whole force from compliance to commitment. And I'm seeing people committed to the profession. So, I mean, we're not there yet. It takes time to get us healthy coming out of COVID, but I'm encouraged.
That's great. Mike Weimer, the 17th Sergeant Major of the United States Army. Thanks so much for your time. Keep doing great things. It's fantastic talking to you and hearing all of your perspectives on everything, and really appreciate your time.
Thank you, David. It's been a joy, and I'll make sure Dave Isom knows. I'll give him a shout out right now. Thank you for introducing us.
Yeah, definitely. And tell old Sergeant Major Ruiz I said hi too. He's got to come back on this thing. I'm still after him. So great.
I will. I'm actually going to see him tomorrow, I think.
Terrific.
I'll let him know.
Yeah, tell him I said hi. We know each other pretty well, so great.
I will.
Okay, thanks, Sergeant Major.
And for the record, I have better hair than he does.